So if you're having a problem with your headlight motor, doing something like that, perhaps you don't need a new motor. Maybe all you need is to replace this gear. The first thing we want to do is to remove the black bezel around the headlight. There's a screw in the back, one in the front, and there's one on the other side. After removing the 3 screws, the black bezel will just simply fall down. You can then access the screws that hold the lid on top. There's a mounting screw on the left and another on the other side. There's also 2 in the back that we can get to once we raise the hood. On the back side of the headlight lid or door are the 2 other screws that we need to remove to get the lid off. All screws are removed. The lid will lift right out. With the headlight up, we can get to the motor, see the motor assembly on the right side, and its wiring harness here, which we'll disconnect. The back side of the headlight pivots on these 2 screws. We're going to remove these 2 screws. First of all, I'm going to disconnect the power to the headlight, then go ahead and turn the headlights off. With the headlight dropped down into the well, we can now get to the actuator arm for the headlight assembly. We need to remove this nut at the bottom. Pay attention to the positioning of the arm before you remove it, because we're going to put it back on as soon as we replace the motor and the gear. It's also okay to go ahead and remove the power wires to the headlights at this time, because it's part of this motor assembly. We're going to take the whole wiring assembly out attached to the motor. The actuator arm will come off now, and then there are 3 bolts we need to remove to take the motor out, held down by these nuts. With the 3 bolts removed, the motor comes right out. Before you disassemble your motor, take note of the flat side of the cam going through the motor. Once you reassemble the motor, you want to make sure the flat cam goes back in the same spot. To disassemble the motor, the lid is actually glued on. So inserting a screwdriver along the same, perhaps a knife, to eventually crack the seal, you can pop this lid off, and here's the gear we want to replace. The gear slips right out. It's a good idea when you put your new gear in to add some white lithium grease. It'll snap out the old armature. It's slotted to accept the slots in the new gear. Once we've added the gear back to the cam assembly, again, let's make sure that we install it back with the same orientation when it was removed. The motor housing needs to be reassembled using an epoxy mixture. Just clean the edges well with a knife or a screwdriver blade, coat it with epoxy, and let it sit before reassembling back into the vehicle. As a side note, you can see the broken tooth in the gear that caused the problem. I've marked on the gear the travel that this gear makes inside of the motor. As you can see, it's not a full rotation, it's not quite half. You could, if you want to save some money, rotate the gear inside the motor and use the good remaining teeth. However, for the cost of this gear, which is about $16, $17 on eBay, we can put in a brand new gear, make the repair a little bit more reliable. Actually let the glue sit overnight, even though it's a 15-minute epoxy, to give it extra time to cure. Go ahead and take the clamps off now. To add a little extra stability, since there are actually no physical clamps on here, I took some moldable epoxy and placed it near the mounts flush with the boss. This will give the plate down here some extra stability once we mount it towards the flat wall. That's going to hold the motor in place. This will keep that lid from popping off. Putting the motor back in, same way it came out, attach the 3 mounting bolts, and then we'll attach the center cam. You want to place the bolts in first so you can get around this bracket. Then attach the nuts. This is a plastic type housing, so you don't need to torque the bolts very tight. About 20 pounds is plenty. The wires that attach to the headlight lamps are color coded with a black and gray connector, so it's very simple to find on this car. Make sure the wiring harness is clear of the hinge for the hood. Then we'll pick up the headlight out of the well and install the rear hinge pins inside out. Again, just snug these up good and tight. You don't have to crank them too hard. Alright. We're at a position now where we can actually do a test to make sure the headlight is operating. How about that? Place the headlight lid. Snug these up. The back end is still loose. We're going to tighten those up last. There may be some adjustments we'll have to make. Same thing on the other side. We go ahead and drop the headlight down. You can get a better idea of how the alignment needs to be done on the back 2 screws. A good indicator here is to look at the paint on the headlight lid. You can pretty much tell exactly where the washers landed with the adjustment screws on the back. That should be pretty good. Say goodbye.